We're here on June 7th for the closing harvest round of the first of the large group calls for the Consciousness Deep Dive. Really delighted to be with everyone here, and we're going to hear some reflections from people on what had meaning or value or what they're taking away with them from the conversation today.
Yes. Actually, it was wonderful to be with other people who are so completely sure about the current insanity and how it is at its last legs. And at the same time, also how completely certain, not content-wise, but as person-wise, certain, even defiant, everybody is in going to be the change. That was lovely.
Thank you, Rob. Are you complete?
Just a logistical thing that came up was a discomfort and uncomfortableness around referring to other people or to collective insanity or mainstream insanity. So just for fun, I thought about the idea of referring to it as collective Maya, because that for me brings forward more empathy. So that's one comment. And then in terms of, I felt more drawn to the larger question about generative ways to engage in mainstream contexts. And I noticed for me, some of the things that came forward were remembering to ask questions. So to inquire with somebody as opposed to educate somebody. So that was one piece. Another is coming home to my own humanity over and over and over. So remembering my flaws, remembering my journey that reflects another person's journey. And speaking from the I place and trying to be honest, trying to stay present with what I'm experiencing. So if someone triggers me or if something someone says triggers me, instead of withdrawing or attacking, of course, to try, because it works so well when I do manage this, to say to the person I'm with, oh, I find that really hard to hear, or I'm noticing I'm feeling kind of emotional now, and to just process that much out loud. It's a modeling, but it's also practical because it keeps me present with the person. And that's always kind of nice, And I think those were the main things. Oh, and the fear, just lastly, the last 2 or 3 weeks, I was privileged with the most horrendous fear. And it really debilitated my energy field. And remembering that, I want to remember what that feels like. Because if I can't remember what that feels like, I'm not sure how helpful I can be in meeting other people's fear when they start facing this stuff. So that's it. Thanks.
Well, Claire and I were in the same group, and she shared some of the things that I was going to share. I'll just add, in terms of the mainstream insanity, I was thinking, to your point about having conversations with people, I can't quite imagine reaching out to someone and saying, hey, you seem to be part of the mainstream insanity. Could we have a conversation? So I don't know what the exact right words are, but there's something about the energy and compassion with which we approach other people that feels important to create the kind of dialogue we want to have. That said, I also am a climate activist who uses nonviolent direct action. And so sometimes I challenge people. I've been challenging corporate executives in the energy industry lately. But I really appreciated the word engage in the question, because I do believe there are ways to bring a different consciousness into that engagement. And I've had experience a few times with calling for prayer or calling for silence in a direct action or even in a meeting with corporate executives that totally changes the energy. And so part of what I was feeling in our conversation is that instead of having this either or, people who are in the mainstream or us who have it all figured out, as Claire said, I for one am not perfect either. Like, how can we sort of be aware of kind of a spectrum of experience and try and engage in ways that that help people lean toward a different consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
I have a gratitude for the reminder that came up in my conversation group about the intergenerational nature of our experience and the gifts, acknowledging the gifts that we have received as a human on planet Earth, and being intentional around what we are gifting to the next generations. And what I really appreciated about that is that it helped me to see that I'm a little bit on autopilot around that when it comes to my grandsons, and I'm a bit of I'm bludgeoning my sons around that, trying to make sure that they are awake and they stay awake. So I just appreciate being invited to step into that, the intergenerational nature of experience and passing on the gifts that have been bestowed going forward. And I think, especially when it comes to my grandsons, I get my greatest joy in being with them and trying to suss out together with a 4- and 6-year-old what skill set they might need for this uncertain future. Because certainly it's not the skill set that men have been gifted in the most immediate last century in Western civilization. There's a different skill set that, and women need different skill sets too, but I've been blessed with 3 sons and 2 grandsons. So it was also quite humorous to me to be in a group as the only woman with other men. It's like, okay, here I am with all the guys again. So thank you for that, Ben. I'm complete.
Thinking about times of fear, I was remembering a couple of times actually when I was experiencing internally a lot of fear, and I wasn't sure what it was about, but it was in an environment where of great joy and happiness and gratefulness, where my older daughter had gave birth to her first child. And so I realized I had to put this fear on hold. I couldn't explore it. I couldn't go into it at that time. So I more or less put it into a block, like a huge block of ice, and stuck it in the refrigerator. And that went on, had to go on for several days. But it because it was in the refrigerator, it wasn't being damaged. In other words, it felt safe, and I was able. And the other thing, just being on this call, I realized one of the reasons I think I was able to do that is that I spent the first 25 years of my life engaged in theater, and in theater, the whole purpose of theater as an actor is to embrace and become another person. And now that I don't know, we won't go into the details of that, but the point is, I enjoyed that. I loved that, and I had just realized that some people can't do that at all, and they've never been engaged in that, and I've seen that. And therefore, whatever's going on with them is what shows up. They have no way to suppress it and take on another role. So I suddenly found myself feeling, just being on this call, feeling grateful for having the skills to put the fear on hold until it was safe and okay to explore it and release it. And I think, and I don't know that this is helpful for anybody else, but it certainly was helpful for me, because I did get to deal with it and release it and understand it, and then it dissolved. But it was able to do that at a safe and appropriate time and place.
Here now, I think it's very interesting because we had today the conversation about how to be human in transformation. And I think very often, if we are meeting in conferences, if we are meeting in the processes of collaboration, if we are meeting in coming together in order to create things, we are shutting our human side down. We are really like focusing on creating some connection on a kind of a rational space, and especially like emotions like fear. I think this is so important to connect, wire that, and really like this is also what for example, I attended the Catapult Future Fest in Oslo, where a lot of impact investors came together, and a lot of people that really had power and really had access to resources that could help us all together right now. And I was feeling exactly that. I was feeling a huge fear, and a huge fear of being alone, a huge fear of not being enough. And I think it's important to have this connection in between us, and also to honor that, and also to find a space where we can empower ourselves, not being stuck in this fear, but also like being able to not get out through an illusion that we are building up. We were talking in our conversation often, sometimes about we know it all, and I think the others don't know it, and I think that's not about it. It's about us. It's not us and them. It's so also what one of the speakers said before me. It's the intergenerational connection. It's the diversity that it makes it really happening. And it's also not that the young people need a skill set. We all need a skill set. It's not like time anymore to wait for the next generation to take care. It's for us and the next generations that also are able to come as indigenous, also thinking in 7 generations, that we really have to recognize right now in a kind of very united way. And the conversations today, I really appreciate very much for what I heard, what I experienced. I also enjoyed it very much that there was a diversity. It was not just a facilitation of facilitators trying to facilitate each other, but we need to get into exchange, because there's a lot of things that we are able to share in this space, and I really appreciate the time today.
Part of what I've been trying to grapple with and understand is, what are the roots of our dysfunction? What are the collective unconscious roots that seem to be so pervasive that have enabled the dysfunction to get to this level? And I'm personally thinking that it really goes back to the beginning of our country. The people who came here originally were from prisons, and and all. But also I'm thinking that the whole notion of manifest destiny is far more accurate as manifest extinction. Whether we're talking about killing the buffalo for its tongue, killing the old growth, killing the cod industry, whatever it is, it seems that our collective unconsciousness is about extinction. And there's plenty of evidence of that on an increasing level as I think about it and look at it. And also, the other piece that I'm thinking is important is Gus Spieth, who was the head of Yale School of Forestry for a while, recently came out and said that in his 30, 40 years of environmentalism, he's convinced that the problems are not environmental anymore. They're spiritual, and they're problems of our values, just like the quote of appropriate technology. And so until we really start grappling, I think, with the essence of the dysfunction, we're not going to get anywhere.
I just want to give some immediate biofeedback that this call and the one on Tuesday, in terms of how to survive and thrive, is that just being on these two calls has helped my nervous system to relax and feel less agitated. So I think I might have said this to you in an email, but these two calls have felt like medicine to my my grief-stricken and despairing self, and kind of brought me back to a more settled sense of a soul self that's not separated from any kind of sentient life on planet Earth. And part of that is to get to what Craig was speaking about. What's the root problem? Is that we are asleep to the sensation of being connected to everything. And whoever said that harm done to anyone is harm done to us all is true. And I feel that every day, which is part of why I'm struggling. But these two phone calls on the Now What deep dive has actually given me a sense of happiness to just be with these people. So thank you for calling me back home, Ben, because I put myself in a timeout, and I'm very grateful that you asked me if I wanted to come back. I wanted to take myself out of timeout. So yeah, thank you. I'm coming out of timeout. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. That that idea that anything I do to you or to the earth, I do to myself, came up in our conversation too, not surprisingly, I guess, but it was particularly in the context of the story about somebody who, is kind of a devout capitalist. He's making lots of money, and he's also a very generous philanthropist. Has those two realms totally separated. But his philanthropy is only very, very specific to the disease that his son has. That's near to him, and so he can connect with that. And he just has no, the story was he has no interest in, let alone maybe compassion or empathy for other things. It's hard to say. It's really, he's not putting his philanthropic dollars there, and he has a lot. And so the question that arose was, well, if anything that is done to any of us is done to all of us, how then it would all be near, and it's all near to us, right? And so that perspective that says only my son is what's near to me is a way that let's call it, for lack of a better term, a kind of a mainstream consciousness that says we're all separate and in our little bubbles and our little units and our little tribes and cohorts, and it's us versus them, or I take care of my own and don't, that's all I can do, even if I don't see the rest of the world as being at odds with me. That is what we're up against in all these manifestations, right? And so it's good to hear you call that out too. And it was funny too, because Maria said somebody just earlier today in a conversation she'd had with someone in the corporate world that also got named, that very same idea, and it shifted the space that she was in when someone said it. So, the ancient wisdom. I mean, didn't Jesus say, right? That which you do to me, the least of us, or something. And of course, it's older than that.
One comment I would suggest too, and this is another thing that I've been thinking about, and that is, isn't it true that it's economics that has really been the cause that has created separation? You know, when we were living in tribes, we had relationships that were direct. But now we only have a relationship with economics, with dollars. And that has allowed us to cut off our essence, cut off what's most important, because money is not most important. So I wrote a piece recently called Economics, the Language of Extinction. And I'm seeing it more in those terms, not just because of the inequity between the rich and the poor, but also because our equations are so totally incomplete. All the externalities and unintended consequences are not included in our equations. And yet they drive the bus off the cliff. And how do we really challenge that sacred cow in a meaningful way?
Well, and that is, in fact, what I think many people who are drawn to this conversation are already deeply engaged with. And certainly I know for a fact that a number of people on the call today would fit into that category. So the analysis you're naming is not at all new. The question of how we shift the system is what we're grappling with, as well as how we live inside of a system that we recognize as being that toxic and that we're still contributing and participating in and kind of, you know, in certain ways trapped in, right? That's really what we're digging into here together.
Jean Houston had a tale about a Mexican farmer who told her he just did not know how to meditate. He had tried everything. And she said, well, what do you love in the world? And he thought a long time. Finally, he said, well, there is this young bull that I saw this bull being born. I love this young bull. And she said, great, go in the room and just think about how you love that bull. And he did. And he didn't come out for hours and hours and hours until finally she went in and asked him if he was all right. And he said, yes, I'm all right, but my horns will not fit through the door.